An Irish Independent digital subscription doesn't just get you the news. It gets you the best of Ireland's stories all in one place. Whether it's the best of politics, business, sport, entertainment or lifestyle. Get it all for just €4 a month for 12 months when you first subscribe. Visit independent.ie/subscribe today. Irish Independent. Terms and conditions apply. Cancel anytime.
You hearing us okay there, fellas? Could I be louder in my own ears? I have it at full blast at the moment. I'd take a touch more and then I can turn it down a little bit. That's great, because then I can turn it down if I need to. Oh, it's interesting. The volume button here doesn't actually... Sorry, I'm turning up the wrong volume button. Okay. That's a first day mistake. I'm unbelievably loud in my ears now, but that's okay. I'll turn it down. No, that's great.
I don't have a volume button, do you?
No, you don't.
Not that I'd be turning you down when you're talking. Yeah.
You should do.
Oh, I see.
There you go. Huh? Okay, then. Whatever happens this time, we just keep going. We'll be here all day. Welcome, everybody. This is Indo Sport. Loud and clear, hopefully. On our very first day, our very first podcast. Thank you very much. A few first day nerves. Email this morning from the editor-in-chief. People coming over, shaking hands. Best of luck. So everybody's a bit nervous, a little bit self-conscious. Rush. But we'll be okay. Just to say... from the off, that so many of you have already hit the follow button. Even before we started, a big thank you. That was a warm and reassuring feeling as we kick off today. Not talking to nobody was always preferable, we felt, even on day one. So, big thank you. We'll do our damnedest to keep you coming back. I keep saying we. Who the hell are we? The Irish Independent, of course. We are the Indo Sport podcast team as well. There is, in no particular order, but he is sitting across from me, Conan Doherty. Conan, hello.
Hello, Joe.
I realised for the first week I've called you Conan and Conan at intervals. I haven't quite settled yet. I don't know if you have a preference.
I don't know if anybody in my life has actually landed on which one it should be either. I think it's Conan because of where I'm from in the island.
Okay,
yeah.
Derry.
It probably should be Conan, but that's how we landed on
So
it.
Conan, not Conan the Barbarian.
Don't really reflect the Fadas too much up north.
Conan, somebody described you behind your back actually on Friday as a Swiss Army knife. In a complimentary kind of a way.
And knowing me now for 2 weeks, how do you feel about that? Do you think
I was like, he's brilliant. So Conan, in no particular order, he's going to be part of the Indo Sport team. He'll be on air from time to time, I would think regularly-ish. He knows his sport inside out, and he is also charged with, no pressure, but transforming the video output of the entire publication.
The podcast of the publication, yeah.
In your spare time. So hence the Swiss Army knife. Short version would be G.A. Mad from Derry and has been known to host an Aston Villa podcast with his brother.
That's the long version as well. That's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Several of those things less depressing in recent years.
Yeah. Well, a lot of those things were really good, maybe for about 3 months at the same time, but I think we've gone past the point.
You may have peaked. Yeah. So Conan's here. Shane Brennan outside is very much of the Irish Independent family already, as were you. You were here when I walked in the door. Key cog in our production team, ideas, guests, clips, you name it, keeping the show on the road. That will be Shane. We have Paul Donegan there, our technical guru, making us sound fantastic, hopefully. And then Ronan Mullen will come on board as a producer. We worked together in a former life, so he's only going to be here next week. It's that kind of a deal. There is a slight startup quality to how we've all come together, albeit within this very established brand. So, one of the perks, I suppose, of the established brand is the sport department. You will hear two of them very shortly. Irish Independent journalists will feature regularly right across the podcast. So that's kind of the deal. I've been here 2 weeks. We've been kind of meeting every day. There's been some fun. There's been some blind panic, and that's kind of where we are. We just had to start, and so we're starting.
Yeah. Well, somebody said to me earlier, behind your back, said, make sure you ask Joe why he joined. And I thought, how can I ask him that without sounding like I'm discouraging him from joining?
Like in a what was he thinking way?
Yeah.
There's no great salacious, interesting answer to that,
I've heard a lot of rumours myself, so I want you to clarify them now.
Well, I suppose the deal was I was bobbing along pretty nicely and off the ball and had no great plans, wasn't looking as such, and got a phone call out of the blue. And so suddenly continuing to bob along was a decision in a way that it hadn't been, with its own ramifications. And lots of coffees with Dave Courtney here, the head of sport, and Cormac Burke, the editor-in-chief. And I suppose different factors, a dawning realisation at just how seriously media house at large is, Media Huis at large is taking the world of podcasting.
This is actually one of the benefits from being where I'm from, because it's the one time I pronounce something correctly. It's Media House.
Okay. Conan Media House, day one. Important. Who you're working with, who you're working for. Very important. But so conversations are, the level of commitment, I suppose, was an aspect. And then certainly what opened the door, the more practical aspect of ours, so we have my wife and I have a 20-month-old daughter, and she is in the process of getting used to creche at the moment. We were just talking about that before coming on air. It's a bumpy road. And my wife's going back to work. And so there was an aspect with Off the Ball whereby I have always worked Sundays and had done since 2010. And that has its drawbacks. Saturday nights out and Sunday dinners and family time. And it's one of those kind of days. But I was happy to do it for a period. But again, now it just feels almost more valuable. And then I was doing the maths on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday into Thursday. And the short version was I would literally not be seeing them, aside from maybe a half-hour breakfast, awake. By the time I would be leaving for work, they would still be at creche work. By the time I would be home, they would be asleep generally, So that kind of focused the mind a touch. And then there was like just some awful good old-fashioned fridge magnet wisdom, carpe diem. Why not? You only regret the things you don't do, Colin. All that, that just kind of came into it. Like, I didn't feel stale or anything on radio, but I suppose I did recognise something new mightn't hurt. Or today there'd be nerves that I wouldn't ordinarily feel or wouldn't have felt since early on in News Talk or doing the Six Nations for the first time on TV. So that was kind of attractive. There was just like a degree of, well, do I do what I've been doing for the last decade plus, 11 years? Do I do it for another 11? Do I do it for 11 after that? And, so it's a midlife crisis is what I'm trying to say to you.
Well, it's actually interesting because I was thinking there's obviously a lifestyle change for you, but it is a work change as well, because I know it's still the same microphone. I know you're still the same Joe Malloy, but you have gone from, albeit it has plenty of pressures, live radio, but it's gone from a 3-hour slot to a 1-hour slot. So you don't have the live radio aspect anymore, but now you only have 1 hour to impress us, Joe. 3 hours, you could definitely get something in there. You could get enough memorable things that people would say, yeah, Joe still got it, but now you've got less time to keep that up. And how do you feel about that pressure?
Well, I feel great about that pressure. What could go wrong? So that's kind of the deal. I mean, it's a very dull answer to your question. There's nothing salacious, interesting. What happened? Yeah. Nothing happened.
Well, I'll wait for Paul Cambridge to interview you then. Then we'll get it all.
Yeah. The previous PK in my life was Pat Kenny. And now it's Paul Cambridge. So a couple of people, Dave Kelly even asked me, because he did a little interview in the paper at the weekend about the podcast, what's the hook or what's different about this podcast? Because podcasts, in a way that radio, it doesn't quite apply. Like there's no, Desert Island Discs, maybe being ironically the exception, in the 1940s. But radio just does like a current affairs show or a magazine show or a sports show or etc. And with podcasts, there's a sense of, well, what's the hook? We don't have one. is the answer. I mean, we're going to just try and talk about sport as well as we can and go from there. There's not really one thing. So a typical week at the moment, we will come to you Monday to Friday is the plan. We will do 1 episode per day. I suspect 2, to your what are you going to do in that hour? I suspect 2 most Mondays because there's lots to talk about. For instance, there's a football podcast coming your way later on this afternoon. There's a certain situation at Old Trafford that needs our attention. But in the main, 1 a day, 2 on Mondays, 2 on occasion if there's big news. We don't really have, we're only in here kind of 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. We don't really have certain sports or certain things locked into certain days yet. Maybe we get there. On the football, for instance, so the journalist of the Irish Independent, of course, and beyond, it's a global sport, global game, so we'll definitely get the best in the business beyond as well. And then alongside that, Damien Delaney and Gary Breen will be a big part of our coverage as the former player's eye, the punditry eye. So delighted they're involved, both exceptional. Damien's going to join us later on and make sense of events at Old Trafford. There'll be long-form interviews. We have an hour with Paul O'Connell coming your way tomorrow, hopefully some other good ones on the way. And then I suppose, you've been in the meeting, so it feels strange to say this to you. There is just the world of sport. There are stories, things happen. We'll react. Last week we recorded a couple of pilots. We were all over Dubois, Joshua, Saudi Arabia taking over Wembley, Rory McIlroy at Wentworth, fresh on the heels of, hot on the heels of Royal County Down. The Vince McMahon documentary drops on Netflix. Yeah. There are endless things to chat about, and we'll just try and do that. So it's not really one thing. There's no great hook to it as such. We'll just try and do everything as well as we can. Maybe have a good time.
Who knows?
So that's kind of the deal. Any other, this preamble is rather strange, isn't it? We kind of feel like we're introducing ourselves. Anything else we should definitely say before we start moving on?
Well, do we even have a name for this next
that's where
segment?
I'm going.
I mean, it is pretty much a startup culture. It is talking about sport in general, current affairs sport, like you say. But we ended up in those trial runs. We ended up talking about Tyrone v Kerry 2003 at length. So this is probably where we could end up taking these detours as we go along. But
yeah, well, two matters at hand. So we sort of think it's worth most Mondays having a panel of sorts, because it's hard to predict, obviously, what the big story might be. Irish Independent journalists will be a big part of it. Today there'll be two of them in to talk about the weekend, and I think it'll work. So I suspect we'll do that in a lot of Mondays. Just a couple of people around the table talking about the weekend sports. A couple of brilliant people will be the point. One of the things we need to sort out is what to call this thing. So the only rule is we're not calling it the Monday panel. For the last 2 weeks, we've referred to the Monday panel. Who's on the Monday panel? What we do on the Monday panel? It just can't be called the Monday panel. Ideas, by all means, are welcome. We have an email address, which we intend to read every day and use every day. So by all means, do get in touch. The email address is indosportpodcast@independent.ie. To get the ball rolling on what the hell to call this panel that we're about to kick off in a moment, I asked Shane on Friday to wander around the office and to ask people generally, say for instance, there was a Monday sports podcast and they were having a panel. What would you call it? And right here, written down, printed out. I haven't seen this. You're going to get instant, immediate reaction. There may be a winner in here. There may be no need for the emails. I'm told you are one of the people he asked.
Oh, yeah. 80% of people said Monday panel. They liked that name, thought it was strong, workshopped it. Yeah,
okay, here we go. Let's see what we got. Suggested names for Monday meetup. The Monday postmortem. Well, that sounds depressing.
So I'm not going to tell you which one's mine, but if you react like that to my one, I will be quite upset.
The Monday postmortem. I mean, everyone's miserable enough already. No,
I
think that's an out. The Monday dive, the Monday meet, the running order, the Monday club, the matchup, the Monday mixdown, the checkdown. Okay, we're going to need help.
You don't like any of them? There's not one that's sticking out to you?
There's not even a contender there. What were you?
Running order.
Running order. Yeah. Genuinely staggered that the Monday panel is still our best option after that effort.
Did you write anything down?
No.
You must be leaning towards something. Are you you're not going to contribute to this? You're just going to wait to hear the right one.
Always be a critic.
Yeah.
Just sit here like you got all the answers. It's genuinely hard to think of names for these things. So that's why I was like, well, we just can't call it the Monday panel. I don't even know if we need so many Mondays in it. A lot of Mondays in those suggestions.
A lot of Mondays in that. I think I went for something different.
Help us out. We'll figure out a name at some stage. Indosportpodcast@independent.ie. Get in touch about that or anything else, really. We'll be reading the emails. Conan, that's our first little conversation as part of this new venture done. So the last couple of weeks have been fun. Best of luck. We're going to do this. It's good to have you along for the ride.
Oh, it's great to have you on board, Joe.
Okay, here we go. Very happy to say in studio we have Mr. Rory O'Connor and Mr. Conor McKeown, both, funny enough, of the Irish Independent. Hello, fellas.
Joe, how's it going? Very welcome.
Listen, don't tank us on our first podcast.
It's all on you.
It's good to see you brought the sunshine with you to the Irish Independent.
Beautiful day.
Beautiful.
There's nothing like Talbot Street in the daylight today.
Any suggestions, by the way, for what we call this thing? This little Monday ensemble?
No,
that's very helpful. Thanks. That's great. Is that the creativity I can expect around here? Wow.
Have you?
No. We had some suggestions from people outside. Shane, I asked him to do it. He very helpfully did it. He stopped people and said, if you were doing a little Monday get-together, what would you call it?
Yeah.
There's no expectation Monday has to be in the name. So we had the Monday dive, the Monday postmortem. That felt grim.
Too
Yeah,
many syllables as well. Monday
Monday
post-mortem.
death, you know.
Monday post-mortem.
The running order was Conan's suggestion. Not
not
going to
bad.
hold it against him. You think it's not bad?
It's okay, yeah.
Okay. Apologies, Conan. The Monday Club, the match-up, the
Monday Club
mix
should be in the
down.
pub.
Yeah, the match-up, the Monday mix down, the check down.
I think we need to go back to the drawing board a little bit.
Like, Conor McKeown brought more ideas there.
Monday Club. I don't mind Monday Club.
No, I don't know if Monday needs to be in it. It's difficult. It's very hard to think of a name.
There is. A lot of them are taken.
We're late to the market. We did put out a call out to our listeners to email in sportpodcast@independent.ie. So we'll
We're already outsourcing our ideas.
pretty much. Well, look, they've had a glimpse of what I'm working with here. So what's going on this weekend? We have, in no particular order, unforeseeable, I think is not too strong a word, win for Ireland over New Zealand in the WXV1 in Canada this morning.
Away it comes for Lane. No, stop. 10 years ago, Ireland pulled off one of the great rugby upsets, and now a new generation of Irish stars have done the same. An historic result for this Irish team. They've worked and worked. What a performance. Ireland 29, New Zealand 27. A famous victory for Irish rugby.
Extraordinary, really. Sinead Kassan stayed up to watch this, which in hindsight was a good decision. In advance, I thought was a really bad decision.
Yeah.
But Ireland have somehow beaten New Zealand 29 points to 27, the world champions. They scored 5 tries. Dan O'Brien there with a kick to win as well at the death, or late on. So we'll talk about that. We'll chat to Rory about the rugby weekend at large. Embarrassing was how Donegal Callan summed up Munster's loss in Parma. South Africa underlined their status as scary good as well. They won the rugby championship. And Johnny Sexton's new book, Extracts, yesterday. Might touch on them. There has been some talk as well of Kyle Hayes' nomination for Hurler of the Year. That has been under the spotlight. So curious to chat to the lads about all of that.
Brennan Johnson and Kulusevski! And Spurs ease clear! These are days to be cherished.
The sheer awfulness of Manchester United just can't be ignored. Beaten 3-0 at Old Trafford. First half of total and utter Spurs domination. Second half, there was a brief 10 minutes of Manchester United giving it a bit of a go, but wasn't much better. In the words of Gary Neville.
The big story today is that in that first half, I can't say from nowhere because Manchester United have been inconsistent all season, but they have chosen to put in the very worst possible performance, their very worst possible showing. It was an absolutely disgusting performance in that first half, in effort, quality, everything that you'd want in a football team. And there are going to be a lot of questions to answer for that group and the manager in the next week.
And there are a lot of questions. It feels, Conor, like Eric Ten Hag has reached that familiar staging post in the end for Manchester United manager that we've become so familiar with.
Yeah, you don't hear the word disgusting evoked too often in sports analysis. So you have to really care about the thing you're analysing to bring in the word disgusting to the performance.
Well, Neville started so, like, the first 10 minutes Neville was already at a high pitch of, like, this is terrible. So where was he going to go? Like, it just kept getting worse and worse, and he had to, like, he'd already described them as several different things by the time Fernandez was sent off. So he just had to keep escalating, and he finished with disgusting, which, like, it's a football match. I know it matters a lot to people and it matters a lot to Gary Neville, but was it actually disgusting? Is disgusting? I think that's too strong a term for what, like, it was a terrible performance, but disgusting suggests something malign, like, or something malevolent, I think.
I was looking at a lot of the informed analysis reaction stuff today, and a huge amount of it sort of suggests, or not just suggests, insists that there was a lack of application on the part of the Manchester United players. But I think sometimes when you think that, what's actually happening is a team goes out on the pitch and the thing that they're supposed to do clearly is not working, that the opposition are just passing around them. And it's almost like, well, there's nothing that we can do within the constraints of our game plan to actually make it look. So it's not that, I don't think they didn't run, the old Roy Keane one of just kick somebody. Like, they couldn't get close to them. And the problem with the Ten Hag thing now is, like, they've played 3 home games this year and they've lost 2 of them 3-0. And I was just looking at his numbers so far. So from 83 Premier League games as Man United manager, he's won 43 and lost 26. Now, Mikel Arteta, who at the moment is flying very high in his role, after 100 games, he'd won 53 and lost 31. So Ten Hag is trending to a similar kind of a record after the same period of time. But I think the difference is that when Arsenal started to make ground under Arteta, they never really took any big step backwards. And for some reason with United, they seem endlessly capable of one of these shocking performances.
The disgusting definitely is getting at the feeling of a lack of application. I take your point that they're so outplayed, and it happened against Liverpool as well. The ball has just been fizzed around them. I mean, Spurs by comparison, like had a kind of wizardry the way they were putting moves together. I think there's a stunned to the spot aspect if you're watching the ball fizzing all around you. But then, by the same token, you still do have Rashford 3 minutes in throwing in his like now guaranteed I'm not bothered moment when Van de Ven intercepts the ball, which becomes a lightning rod. And there still are a whole bunch of tackles which are just a bit wishy-washy and really bad touches. And so I also think with Neville, and he said it a few times, what was looming large in his thinking were the comments of Eriksen after the FC20 match, where Christian Eriksen came out and said they wanted it more than us. And Neville was sort of saying, well, on Thursday, yeah, I noted it, but now on the back of this performance, I'm reading more into that. I'm thinking this is Eriksen. He's played hundreds of games of football. I can't think of another interesting interview he's ever given. And in so much as he can possibly do, he's coming out to let everybody know this is a mess behind the scenes. They want it more than us. And there was no reaction to that type of an interview.
He had a good go at Ireland a couple of years ago, Eriksen, didn't he? He kind of drive-by at Ireland's tactics after one of those endless Ireland-Denmark games. But is it the manager or is it the players? Like this dressing room, even though it's changed and there's a new cast of characters, it seems like the players are still failing to apply themselves in these games. And there's always this assumption that a new voice will come in and we'll get a different tune out of the players. But they've changed managers so many times. Yeah. There seems to be an endless cycle. Obviously, I think the difference between Arteta and Ten Hag is that if you watch the Amazon Prime documentary about Arsenal in one of those seasons where they were kind of half getting it right and then one step forward, 2 steps back, they were unbelievably aligned and backed. Arteta was their man. They were building the entire thing around him, whereas Ten Hag was appointed and then the hierarchy's completely changed. And like Dan Ashworth, all these characters that are there behind the scenes, all these gurus, and like they're going to want to eventually put their own man in, and they've got the perfect cover to do that if they have the backing of the owner and the funds to pay him off, because I presume his payoff is going to be fairly substantial. It doesn't look like it's going to work under Ten Hag, but there's no guarantee that you bring in Thomas Tuchel and it's going to work for him, because those players just don't seem to respond to all the different types of managers that they've had over the years.
Plus, Ineos have had a howler here. Like they interviewed with Ten Hag for his own job during the summer. They were on the precipice of moving him on. And not only did they retain him, they gave him a longer contract and spent a load of money on players that he'd coached before. So if they do sack him, they've had a howler. They've had an absolute howler. So like which is the rock and which is the hard place?
I guess they just couldn't have foreseen how bad they were going to be again.
Could they not?
I mean,
and meanwhile,
they possibly should have.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the Glazers have done the incredible job of putting in double glazing between themselves and the Fury. Like there's
not a hint of the Glazers anymore.
No. Like you want to have a go with the players, the manager, fine, and then you can have a go at Ineos. So they're sitting somewhere pretty, counting all their money.
It is. There is something just so odd about the whole situation, given the array of managers come through, the money that they spent. That so many of their problems are just perennial, the same problems. So no patterns on the ball. I mean, aside from Van Gaal passing everybody to death or to sleep, which was kind of his aim. Like again, you looked at Spurs yesterday, and it's just this kaleidoscope of movement and passing. And you're looking at somebody like a Doggy, who's a left back, but actually is playing inside left and ahead of the ball, and you think, God, he's such a good player. And then he goes off, and Spence comes on, does exactly the same thing, drilled to within an inch of his life. And you're looking at United, they still can't play out from the back. It's like individuals doing their thing. There's no press. I mean, it's like they are immune, regardless of players over the last decade, to try and press. Solskjaer, what did him in the end was trying to press. I was like, I can't really do this rear guard action thing much longer. I mean, Liverpool at home, they said, we tried to press, and Liverpool said, okay, I'm just going to pass it by him, and now we're in. And they just can't do it. Like, Neville all game was like, what? There's no logic to it. There's no trigger for it. You spot one fairly quickly where like their left centre half gets the ball and the press starts because they think he's no good on the ball. This is just a mishmash of people looking around. Like, that's on the manager. And there's also, so he kind of arrived as like a tactician, a coach, Ajax, modern football. This is what United need after Ralph Rangnick and after Solskjaer. This is cutting edge. And it's not there. But then he's most certainly not a motivator. Like, do you ever sit through one of his interviews and say, man, I'd love to... if I was going to play football for somebody, it'd be that guy.
And he's quite chippy as well. And now I know the media interviews...
Well, they're getting worse by the day.
Yeah, they're getting worse by the day. But like, he gave an interview last year where he bizarrely said that, well, I was never going to come here and play the football that we did at Ajax. Yeah. And you think, well, why do you think they hired you in the first place? It's not like, we could get a guy from Ajax to come over here and lump it up front. And even trying to, I'm sure the subtleties of a press are above our level of knowledge. But I was just watching it yesterday, and Fernandes and Xerxes sort of pressed as a 2. You see a lot of teams in the Premier League do that now, play as a 4-4-2 out of possession. Yeah. But they're just making random runs and just kind of like, chasing a leaf around the playground sort of thing. And once they got passed by, then all of a sudden Spurs had a 7-man defence to break down, and they were in the perfect position. So,
and that's when they're not trying hard comes into it, because they're a bit shell shocked as a team. They're just pinned. Yeah. So I don't know. I wouldn't even think Manchester United fans at large are terribly excited about the prospect now of, okay, we have to get rid of him, we have to bring someone else in, we have to pretend that that's going to work and get excited, and it's not really going to work. And also now there's this great undoing of Ten Hag signings. There's the ordeal of, well, we have to get rid of Anthony, we have to get rid of him, and that takes, Ten Hag's had 5 transfer windows and spent a lot of money, so again, you're back to square one. This is going to be a long process. The only hope is that you look at what Emery has done at Aston Villa to a point. You look at what Postecoglou has done at Spurs. They arrived, and almost instantly there's a kind of familiarity with what they're doing, or a rubber stamping of theirs on the team.
If you put either of those managers in charge of United and said, go out and do what you did there, like,
and
United could still end up finishing higher than Spurs at the end of the season, but the Spurs fans will have had more fun.
Yeah, and won't have to spend £1 billion either.
No, that's the thing. But like, it's like, those managers have come in with vision or with their own idea of what they want to do, and they found it to be an ungovernable club, whether it's the dressing room or the hierarchy. It does seem like they've done a lot of the kind of, not to use the high performance podcast terms, but like best in class stuff of kind of get good people and just fill the place full of good high performance type people, and they will eventually make the right decisions, enough right decisions that it will go the right way. And obviously the investment is there, but I can't see it working until they have their own people in charge. Like, if they're dealing with a fella that they wanted to get rid of last year, Connor's point is, like, he's completely undermined. They've completely undermined Ten Hag's authority within that dressing room, because the players are all gone. Well, he'll be gone soon anyway. So, and another season will be gone.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I think that's where the high performance language falls short. This is the brutal world of football. Jamie Redknapp a few times yesterday made the point about the summer, talking to other managers. He was just speaking like a guy who's lived his whole life in dressing rooms, and he just said, "You've killed him. Yeah. You've killed him. Like, you've just killed him. There's no authority. They know he's doomed. It's over." And maybe Ineos aren't used to that level of unprofessionalism that still pervades a little bit in the dog eat dog culture.
Yeah, I was listening to the interview that Ole Gunnar Solskjaer did with the
overlap.
The overlap. Sorry, and he was just using this as a very small symptom of the overall sort of disease that's around Manchester United. But he said he couldn't convince any of the players to do the pre-match interview, the 3 very bland questions from which you give 3 very bland answers. And you look at somebody like Rashford and players who are very much part of the club and want it to be something better than it is, and you wonder whether the environment is just so stressful and sort of angst-ridden, and you're so much in the public eye, that it would take an incredibly inspirational and focused manager to get everybody in that mindset.
I was wondering when you were building up to your Roy Keane pitch.
Can you imagine Roy Keane with those players? Wow. Like, we don't have to really. We know what he has to say about them, but like,
I think you'd need a HR presence at all times. Rashford is an interesting case. So, you know, you think of the stress, you think of the vitriol that he's on the end of. Even if it's just for pure practical PR reasons, make like a faux attempt to run back after Van der Ven.
Yeah. He's a very unusual footballer, isn't he? Like
Very strange situation. Yeah.
It's an unusual career, and it's hard to marry like the player that emerged, and obviously the profile that he got from his representations to government and all that sort of stuff. And since then, it seems to have fallen off a cliff. And I don't like to link the two, because I like to think that players can have another life and have an influence and be a force for good. But he seems to be a lightning rod as well, and he knows it. And like, these players all have phones. They all, I'm sure, look at them when they go exit the dressing room on a Saturday or a Sunday, and that probably definitely won't help them. You know, like it must be quite a difficult. Sorry, it's not a difficult place to work, because you're playing for Man United, and it's it's the dream job in some ways. But I think it can get on top of you quite quickly, and you can see that. You can see that. But yeah, you're right. That should inspire them to work harder. That should be the non-negotiable, really. But it doesn't seem to be. And then if your captain's Fernandes, does that just not set the tone across the board?
Yeah, that's where it's so worrying. Is that I've literally a few days earlier had the Twente result. Had Ericsson come out and say they wanted it more, and on 2 minutes 20 seconds, you're Rashford. You take that touch, Van de Ven reads it, and you just do that. Well, I'm just going to keep trotting this way. There's no possible way I could even though you're not going to catch Van de Ven. I mean, nobody is at that stage. But it's just the message. It's just what you're saying to your teammates, to the crowd, to everybody.
And you can tell as well, and particularly I was watching the game with somebody yesterday, and within 10 minutes he'd kind of picked it out that he said, look at Fernandes' body language. You know, for a captain, he's doing an awful lot of gesticulation and throwing his hands up. And there's obviously a certain amount of frustration that you are going to express as a captain, but it just looks terrible.
Yeah.
You know, and you're basically saying, why am I surrounded by gobshites? That's basically what like his expression is saying. And then he goes and gets himself sent off because it was basically a poor attempt at a foul. I suppose when things just start crumbling down around you, they come down very, very quickly.
Well, they're coming down right now. We're into the untenable performances stage, I think, of the Ten Hag reign. Damien Delaney is going to join us later on. So, fellas, another story which caught attention this week was the nomination of Kyle Hayes for Hurler of the Year. It's a 3-man shortlist. He is there alongside the heavy favourite Shane O'Donnell and Dara Fitzgibbon. The specifics of this, there's, I think, 12 journalists picked the shortlist, and you weren't one of them, were you? No? Have you been in the past?
No.
How do you feel about that?
McKeown snubbed.
3-man shortlist picked by these 12 journalists, and then the inter-county players at large vote accordingly. And Kyle Hayes was picked. I just saw like the Sunday World compiled a few tweets yesterday, and you know, the more negative variety. There were things like, GAA, read the bloody room. Kyle Hayes, are you serious? Kyle Hayes, seriously? I suggest the GAA go away and think about this. The short version on Hayes, I'm sure generally you're all au fait with it, but earlier this year found guilty of violent disorder, so his victim was left with a broken eye socket. Details from the case were not great. There was the awkward moment for John Kiley in the courtroom where he went to bat for Hayes, and he said Hayes had taken responsibility for his actions, to which the prosecuting barrister's eyes lit up and he swiftly said he's pleading not guilty. And that was a difficult square for John to try and circle. So It was awkward to say the very least. 2-year suspended sentence, and what followed, I suppose, of late, less serious, but not nothing either. Conviction for dangerous driving, 155 kilometres in a 100k zone in July. He won't drive again for 2 years. It was kind of a situation where there were 2 lanes into one, and he overtook 9 cars, felt he was running out of road, put the foot down, but that was certainly deemed dangerous. It should be noted in all this, and you know, we are contributing as well, that Judge Roberts in that driving case did say that even just that week he had seen far more serious, significant cases in the courtroom which merited media coverage, and there was none. And this is the downside to a public profile, and it's where Kyle Hayes finds himself. I dare say when he saw the nomination list, a part of him would have thought,
leave it off.
Jeez, leave me alone. Was he absolute shoo-in, had to be on that 3-man shortlist?
No, he wasn't. I think like Shane O'Donnell will be Hurler of the Year for many reasons. Primarily because he deserves it, and secondly because it becomes a bit of a popularity contest, and Shane O'Donnell may well be the most popular hurler there has ever been. So, but after that, there was probably 5 or 6 people who you could make cases for, and it just depended on the things that you think are worthy of nomination. Hayes was definitely up there, and I think I'm glad that he was nominated for Hurler of the Year, just to kind of I'm not sure that GAA players or high profile sports people or even high profile people necessarily have that responsibility to be role model. I think the role model is the big thing here. Like when the All-Star scheme came in the late 60s, players who were red carded in any game of the championship were then exempt. You could have scored 20 points in every match, but if you were sent off in one of them, you wouldn't get an All-Star. Now they did away with that rule for very obvious reasons, because it's quite stupid. And I think even though the parameters of this case are more complex, it's the same basic principle. You know, I mean, what Kyle Hayes did on the pitch, if it's deemed worthy by those 12 wise men to be nominated for Hurler of the Year, I'm not sure that what he did off the pitch should have anything to do with it.
And does one's actions off the pitch ever come into it? Is there ever a line you would draw?
There probably is, and I don't want to even get into the specifics of it, because you'd have to take it on a sort of rational case by case basis. I would because you're I think it would be great if all high profile sports people were fantastic role models with high social conscience and everything else. But it'd be great if all our politicians and all our journalists and all our actors and everything else who's in the public eye had the same thing. And just because Kyle Hayes or anybody else is a high profile sports person, I mean, they're still prone to the same human fallibility as anybody else.
Yeah, it was up to Limerick. The decision was John Kiley's at the start of the year. Was like, is this guy, and it's probably their sponsors, is his behaviour what we want representing our jersey? And that was when the decision, once they backed him to play, then he was eligible, and if he played well, it's a very tough conversation for those 12 journalists. I don't know. I've never asked. I haven't asked. I don't know who's on it, but did it come into I'd love to know if it was in the discussion room when they were sitting around. Did anyone say, "Hang on a second, should we pull this?" Or did they say, "No, he played well, and he deserves to be there"? And really, it's a sponsorship issue. It's I don't know, Conor. Does Kyle Hayes do a lot of gigs? Does he draw? Does he draw a living from his reputation as a hurler?
No, he doesn't. No. So,
if he takes the Stephen Cluxton approach, where he's just a hurler, and he's being judged on being just a hurler, he doesn't put himself up there. He's not, an ambassador for a range of things that sell him as some sort of family man, as a clean cut hero. Then you can justifiably say this: look, he's a hurler, he's a fallible human being who's made mistakes. Now they're pretty bad mistakes, and they don't reflect him in a very good light. And I think it would colour your impression of that Limerick team, and it would colour your impression of him as an individual. A team that I remember them being lauded for not going to pubs a couple of years ago, when with not taking Liam McCarthy into pubs, and that was kind of held up as a real exemplar. But in the years since, that's probably been tarnished. Look, a wonderful team, but if they choose to select them, then they reap the kind of the reputational risk that comes with. But you can't. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, it is a big thing amongst, I think, sports teams generally, but also particularly high performance inter-county teams, that you do have a role, that you do have a social. I think a lot of them would be very conscious of, I suppose, the standing that they have from playing inter-county football and hurling, and how maybe there is some responsibility that goes with it. It goes back to the no dickheads thing with the All Blacks. Better people make for better athletes, particularly in a team environment where you're all buying into this, culture, the most overused word. But as regards role model for wider society, and I have to say, just to point out, I think, I think he's been he makes some very, very poor decisions. That's very, very clear. But in terms of being a role model, I think sports people as role models, Kyle Hayes is a role model insofar as young people will say, well, if I practice my hurling every day, I can win 5 All-Irelands by the time I'm 23, or wherever it was with Kyle Hayes. I think that's maybe as far as their obligation stretches.
Unless they unless they go to another stage and start being doing ads for Super Value and being that's I think where it becomes more of a they are embracing and earning money from being role models. And if he hasn't done that, the most equivalent thing in my world, and it's a very different scenario, is the Belfast trial, and the RFU chose at the end of that to terminate the contracts of both players who were involved. But that came after huge pressure from sponsors. And it's a very different scenario because it's a professional sport. But it was a pretty big step for them to do that. So a lot of sporting organisations wouldn't have done that. They would have found a different way of keeping very... you could justifiably say that Paddy Jackson leaving the Irish rugby setup over the last 6, 7, 8 years cost Irish rugby dearly because it wasn't a viable alternative to Johnny Sexton. But the RFU, with a lot of pressure coming on from sponsors, chose to terminate that contract. He's gone off and earned a living in France as a result.
And even furthermore, it's an interesting example. It's worth drawing the comparison with Hayes. They were found not guilty.
Absolutely.
It was on the basis of
reputational damage.
The details in the case, the WhatsApp messages,
yeah.
reputational damage.
Yeah, and as I say, very different cases, but a different approach. And we have, I think, but because the RFU are so tied up in corporate Ireland and have so many sponsors and have a reputation, also they're a governing body. Well, Limerick GA are a governing body in a different way, but they have a benefactor rather than a team of a suite of sponsors who can pick up the phone to was then Philip Brown and say, hang on a second. I remember being in a corporate box after one of the Ireland games with one of the RFU's big sponsors, and the only Ireland had just won the Six Nations, and the only topic of conversation in the box was the trial, and that was what was coming on the pressure. Whereas if Limerick is a very different set of circumstances, they've chosen to go their way of keeping him on board. So once he was kept on board, he becomes eligible, and then it's up to the All-Star sponsors, or whether they want to be associated with this. And if he was to go up the steps to win it, which obviously sounds like it's unlikely, and he then gets interviewed on live TV and goes, it's almost like the question is, does it venerate or validate what he's done? I don't think it really does. I think people are clever enough, but if you're the sponsor of that event, or if you're like, that's where it becomes tenuous. But like, do we want the sponsors of sport to be the arbiters of all this stuff?
That's the interesting question. Who decides?
Yeah.
Who draws the moral line? So it's interesting, Conor, you said, well, these issues or these mistakes on Hayes' part, not good, clearly, but for me, not far enough. There would be a line somewhere.
I think I
think there has to be a line somewhere. I mean,
yeah,
we'll get there eventually. So there has to be a line somewhere, but this isn't it. And so should it be sponsors who decide, yeah, that's approached the line for me, that's the line. As you said, we don't want them making that decision. What about the way Limerick have decided to handle it? As in, Hayes himself has said nothing.
Yeah,
head down, and John Kiley was asked about it in that first league match that Hayes played in, and really shut it down. Phrases like, it's been dealt with, it's behind us, move on.
Yeah, I think I would say that, I would imagine that it causes a lot of hassle between management and players when situations like this. In fact, I know it does, not necessarily in this case, but in other similar or comparable cases. The problem is we, the kind of public, are always looking for contrition, and we're looking for people to condemn other people who are close to them. But when they're in a team environment and one of them is, a manager, or one of them is the captain and everything else, it's very rare that you get genuine sentiment being expressed there. And it's far more common that what they do is try and protect the individual in question. So, whatever rebuke that they might have received, whatever kick in the arse that they might have gotten, whatever threat that there might have been about dropped off the panel, they're certainly not going to do it in the public eye. And I think that's why sometimes we end up in a situation where we're saying, well, why Limerick don't care about this? They're not saying anything. But I think it's very rare now for managers to come out and condemn players, or the county board, or whoever it is that we're looking for justice from here.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't really expect Kiley to condemn him.
I think if he was the sub goalie, he'd be dropped off the panel quietly. There's also a talent factor. Yeah. Maybe I'm underestimating John Kiley and his loyalty to his players, but it does tend to be the players who are very, very good who get backed by managers, and they if you're willing to risk the reputation of your entire county team over an individual, it helps that he's a very good player.
No, it probably makes up your mind a touch more quickly about what to do. I suppose as well, there's the interesting question about Hayes himself. Publicly come out, show contrition. Horrific mistake, can't believe I did it, so sorry to the victim, so sorry to everybody, etc. But then maybe it's difficult if you've pled not guilty. I'm not sure the legality of all of those things. Like, you're into tricky terrain.
But again, if he just sees himself as simply a hurler, as he seems to, like, if he doesn't court publicity, if the only reason he's a public figure is because he's very, very good at what he does, well, then he won't feel any obligation to go out and do that. He just wants to win as many as artists as he goes and then disappear, and that may be what he does.
And I guess he's perfectly entitled to live his life that way. You know,
Because it's an amateur, well, it's a pseudo-amateur sport.
play sport, I go home, I don't owe the public at large anything.
Yeah, and I think that probably, and I don't want to sort of speak on behalf of Kyle Hayes here, but I would imagine no more than the judge said in the speeding case. Part of you will start to think, well, if I wasn't a hurler, if I wasn't playing for the most successful hurling team of the last 20, 30 years, none of this stuff would have made the newspapers in the first place. So I don't know whether Kyle Hayes feels hard done by the level of scrutiny he came under. If he does, he's been poorly advised again, because that's the nature of the beast.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
But I would imagine that the idea of kind of fueling that by adding to the conversation, as opposed to just hoping that time passes a little bit more quickly and people stop talking about it.
Yeah.
I'd say that's the more likely course of action.
And then the nomination list came out. Great. On the point generally, Eamon Sweeney was writing about it yesterday, about the fawning media and fans and the way we elevate sports people. It is one of the great failings of humanity that we do it, isn't it? I mean...
But we wouldn't be here producing a podcast if we didn't admire sports people and what they do. Not admire, but it's all our listeners. That's what they spend their weekend doing. Like,
I'm with you. I suppose I'm talking about the environment whereby athlete, any sport, any location is asked about Middle East, does not want to answer the question at all, mumbles something about, well, it's not great killing people, and we will present this as player X speaks sense on Middle East, weighs in on Gaza wonderfully. And we do elevate them beyond their asking. And we they just have to mumble anything about anything, and we present it as, this is Noam Chomsky. Yeah. And also, and there's another thing as well, in terms of what we want from them. We like it when we agree. When Steve Kerr comes out and talks about gun crime so brilliantly, we love it. But like if Harry Kane in England had come out and said the Qatar World Cup's the business, this is the best World Cup ever, the first thing we would say would have been, get back in your box, you're just a footballer. There's also that complete hypocrisy on our part.
of course.
That was all I had to say about that.
No, I think it's a fair point, and it's a social media issue as much as anything else, in terms of everyone retweeting these little quotes with, it's classy from the fella, isn't it? But I'm sure there are people within dressing rooms within Ireland who are probably, quite capable of turning up at a far right march and saying something quite unpopular about immigration issues and stuff like that, and they're being wise and keeping their counsel, but they could easily start coming out and say stuff like that, and those opinions won't be read in the same way, and they'll get shot down. So it's all through the prison that you're looking at stuff. But building up sports people is a fool's errand. At the same time, it's kind of what we like. I try not to report on them as if they are anything more than what they are.
What would be thrown at the rugby fraternity is the word heroic is used far too often.
Very rarely in copy.
Okay.
Yeah, I like it's. I guess the physical nature of the sport lends itself to a bit of hyperbole. I think hurling will get that a bit as well. You go out and play a sport like hurling or rugby, and you watch the intensity with which they play, the physicality at which they play. It does draw the hyperbole out of it. I mean, we started talking about someone calling footballers disgusting. Hyperbole exists in our world.
It's true.
Yeah, like it is. It does go over the top, and then you see people kind of either going on the late or they do something very, very grand, and they're held up as being God's gift, and that's. I just think it's part. The industry does sometimes overstep it, and so does social media. People just do see people who are good at sport doing fairly ordinary things and elevate it, and that's to go back to what you were saying at the start. I try not to do it myself, but I'm sure we all fall victim to it sometimes.
We invest, that's the point of sport. We all invest our time in following these people, and we develop weird little crushes on them in athletes that we all really like. And then when they say a thing that aligns with our worldview, we're like, no wonder. We were literally meant to be together. And there is a touch of that. And there's a whole sport debate now. There's so much chat about morals, and there's so much chat about people taking stances against this and the infection. And that people didn't talk about this 30 years ago. I'm sure if you listen to a version of Indo Sport, whatever it was 30 years ago, it was very much along the lines of who's going to win and why are they going to win and why didn't they win. And because of the space that sport occupies now, it's as much a political field as it is some sort of moral minefield.
To what extent do you think sports people are role models for adults? Are your role models sports people?
No, not at all. But
Like,
if I'm 41, Joe, like it's kind of
That's
the
what I
ship
mean.
has sailed.
We
I
trot
don't-
it out.
Like
So,
kids admire them. Kids look up to them. That's definitely
but
a thing.
kids don't know what's going on. I mean,
No.
the only role model kids clocked something was gone awry with was the Toyman, as
Yeah.
we know.
Well, that was
before an Oireachtas committee. I mean, that's the only time the kids have been rattled.
But it's also the kind of scenario where these things are held up as like, oh look, the toy man is a classic example of like, did any kids actually,
No, is a politician making up an anecdote?
will any kid actually go out and do something bad because Kyle Hayes did something bad? Is that actually going to happen? Does anyone think that what Kyle Hayes did is okay because he plays well for Limerick? Probably not. It really is a corporate thing. It's
because the way the think of the children nonsense is just such nonsense. It will have no bearing whatsoever.
Well, if you look at somebody like Michael Darren McCauley, for instance, right, like he is literally doing like great stuff.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? In terms of like social inclusion and
Yeah.
Dublin inner city, and now he's working with people, and
That's legitimately wonderful and impressive.
But what I would say about that is, and this comes back to my theory about we all have crushes, is I would guarantee you that his rating as a hero is higher in Dublin than it is in the counties that Dublin used to beat when he was playing, because we'll always look for reasons to dislike the people from the teams or the athletes that we don't follow. That's how petty we are as human beings.
Okay, we'll come back to it, I'm sure.
Away it comes for Lane.
No, stop!
10 years ago, Ireland pulled off one of the great rugby upsets, and now a new generation of Irish stars have done the same. An historic result for this Irish team. They've worked and worked. What a performance. Ireland 29, New Zealand 27. A famous victory for Irish rugby.
Sure is, and not one we saw coming. So Ireland have beaten the world champions in the WXV1 in Canada this morning. WXV1 as in top tier, first tier. They were in WXV3 last year. This was expected to be a fairly miserable, difficult campaign, and they've beaten New Zealand, world champions, in the opener. Sinead Kassan was supposed to be on the panel today with us, and then we heard she was staying up to watch this match, and we said, God, don't come into it. Like, don't worry about it. You don't need to rush into us to talk about New Zealand beating Ireland by 40. We'll get you later in the week. So we'll talk to her later in the week. The short version here, Rory, and you can put some meat in the bone, is that Ireland have hit rock bottom in recent years when it comes to women's rugby. In 2023, they were bottom of the Six Nations, 0 points, never looked like scoring a try. It was a disaster. Yeah. And all the others around them were turning professional. Wales in particular turned professional, and they suddenly had this great leap. And you have Irish players retiring. You had Nicola Friday, the captain at the time, basically in tears after every match. I remember in Virgin Media one evening with Fiona Hayes and Sene Nuopu and Jenny Murphy, and the three of them were in tears after Ireland, the wooden spoon. Like it was just, there is no way out of this. Scott Bimand has come in as coach. He had worked with England. There was kind of a sense, you know what, he's just the right coach to get a group up to a certain standard. He'll be really good at that. And in the Six Nations just gone, Ireland finished third, which was far better than we had anticipated. The worry ahead of this WXV1 was that what had happened to Wales would happen to us. So Wales this year, having been so good in 23, finished bottom this year. And that's because they went to WXV1 and everybody pummeled them and morale hit the floor.
Yeah.
And it was like, we just can't even raise ourselves. So the worry here was Ireland have somehow, a few quirky results in the Six Nations. The performances were better without being excellent. Ireland have somehow here qualified for the World Cup, which is great, by finishing third, and also got into WXV1, which may not be great. This could be really ugly.
Yeah.
And it was, in that vein that we gave Sinead thumbs up to watch the match last night. And don't worry about coming into us for the Monday post-mortem. It doesn't work.
No, definitely not. I watched a video a little bit earlier of, having not stayed up, I must confess, of the players in the dressing room singing Zombie. And it's a year since the World Cup. And I remember
McKeown gave a look there.
I know, yeah. Well, I've read his stuff. I remember being in the Stade de France last year, and they just won one of their WXV3 games. I don't know, was it the 109-0 win over Kazakhstan, or their big win over Colombia, or their one-score win over, I think they needed a late try from Niamh Jones to beat Spain in the final. And they were singing Zombie in an empty stadium in Dubai, having won the third-tier tournament, and we were in the Stade de France about to go watch Ireland-South Africa or Ireland-Scotland, and Zombie became, like, over there, Zombie was amazing. I know it got loads of flack back here, but like over there in the stadium, it felt incredible, and it just jarred so much to see the music being played at the end and no one there, and off Broadway, and in the space of a year, they have transformed themselves, and the RFU have transformed them by pumping money in, by backing them. The coaching ticket is really, really strong. Like Kevin Potts took over from Philip Brown as the CEO of the RFU a couple of years ago, and made it his mission to fix this, because he knew this, like, the one stick that you could beat the RFU with for years and years and years has been the women's team and the women's setup, and he has thrown, like, they've invested really, really heavily in it, but that wouldn't be worth anything if the players were no good. And now we're starting to see that the players, now that the 15s and the 7s have come together, because the Olympics is over, and suddenly we've got Amy Lee Murphy-Crowe on the wing, and Erin King scored 2 tries today. She was over in Paris at the Olympics, and if Bevian Parson hadn't done her ankle over there, or was it her Achilles, she'd be there as well. There's, we're now getting the potential of Irish rugby pulling together a bit more, because all the players are available to the coach to pick. Stacey Flood started fullback, made an unbelievable jackal turnover early in the game when they were under a bit of pressure from New Zealand. So you're harnessing the potential of the game rather than splitting it in 2 different directions for the time being, probably until the World Cup. That's the way it'll go. And you've given them good coaching. They've got belief back, because I know I can hear the pain in your voice, Joe, of that year covering that Six Nations. Like, it was so grim and so soul destroying, and players walking away as a result of how soul destroying it was. And now suddenly, like, Niamh Jones scored a try today. Like, Niamh Jones was on the pitch for all of those defeats. Yeah. Like, Cleena Maloney was exiled. She comes on and does really well today. She watched that. She was part of the World Cup in Ireland, and she's been through the mill. So for those players to finally have a team that they can believe in, a bit of confidence and belief, a moment now that they can hang, like, the Six Nations was good, but this is a real moment they can hang it on.
To the point where I asked this with love and respect, was this a weakened New Zealand side?
They rotated a little bit, but I wouldn't take that away from Ireland. It's a fairly quick fire tournament. You're going to have to manage your squad. Ireland, I'm sure when New Zealand looked at it, Ireland were the weak link in the group, so they went, right, we'll change our front row, for example, and we'll make a couple of tweaks. But, like, there was players like Ruby Tui was on the wing. These are the world champions. They're not the best team in the world, New Zealand. England are the best team in the world. New Zealand managed to beat them in the last World Cup final, but I think England were the best team at that tournament. A little like what Johnny Sexton said in his book about Ireland are the best team in the world, even though South Africa won the World Cup. So, but they're still very, very strong, New Zealand, and they would expect to beat Ireland. So it is a proper upset. It's a proper result, and they've kind of, whatever they do now from here on in at WXV1, hopefully they get another result, because they've beaten the strongest team in their pool. Yeah. They can go home having made a bit of progress and justify their place at the top table with just less than a year to go to a World Cup.
Yeah, it's an incredible turnaround. We'll try and speak to somebody from the team this week. We'll certainly speak to Sinead and get her thoughts on things. You mentioned Johnny Sexton.
Yeah.
Book season is coming. There are high hopes for Sexton's book.
Nobody is safe.
Because his diary in 2013 after the Lions gave far more than a current player should have given. And now, obviously, it's open season.
Yeah.
So there were extracts yesterday in the Sunday Times. There's obviously the Raj stuff, which would have made headlines. I think people are generally...
there wasn't what I was drawn to.
On top of that. Yeah. Same. So, I mean, the Raj thing in a nutshell was around that time when they were vying for the number 10 jersey, there was a game where Sexton wasn't kicking well, which seemed to happen around that period quite a bit. And he was about to be substituted and had a kick just before he was about to go off. And he was just angry at the situation, and so kicked it with a bit of anger and a bit of authority. And then Dave Alred said, that's how you should kick, with a bit of anger, let's use it. And so forevermore, or certainly for a long time, he imagined O'Gara's face and kicked it right between his eyes. Which is pretty funny.
Roger loved that.
Yeah, game would respect game there, I think.
I have to say I'm struck reading the excerpts, the three, that the common theme running through the three of them is just how chippy Johnny Sexton is. Clearly it's what made him the kind of, the orchestrator, the guy completely in power, in his position for so long. Yeah. But you can see why. You could see why he was incredibly unpopular with opposition players as well. Yeah. Like the thing about, he ended up throwing flailing punches at Leo Cullen because he knew he was getting dropped for the game during the 2011 World Cup. I mean, that's one of the but that's one of the more spectacular sulks I've ever heard from a player who's just been dropped from a team.
He's a very interesting cocktail in that he has that angry streak in him, for sure. And yet, unlike, I imagine, a Roy Keane, unlike those types who also have that chippiness in them, he then really cares what people think. Doesn't sit well with him afterwards. So that strikes me as a really difficult sphere to exist in, whereby you can't help yourself. You throw a punch at Leo Cullen who you're unbelievably close to. You give out to everybody. And yet you go home and feel bad about it.
Well, sorry, the other thing that I found really interesting, you're saying that he cares what other people think. Like, there's a passage in this, which is his autobiography, where he speaks about some of the commentary after the All Blacks loss in the last World Cup, about how he should have been taken off because his legs were gone. I'm thinking, like, the fact that not only did he consume some of, given that he'd just retired and they'd been knocked out of the World Cup, not only did he kind of consume some of the general conversation about it, he was compelled to put it into his autobiography. It goes to show you just how much he cared about all of that stuff.
They read everything. We know at this stage that everyone reads everything, and even though they say they don't, like, you know, Johnny would have been very aware of the coverage around them at the time. I did think that quote almost undid itself, because he said his legs went in that 30s whatever phase at the end, and I mean, is that not the point? Is that, you know, the issue that we've talked about for years and years of Ireland kind of, you know, marrying themselves to a guy who was going to be 38 at the next World Cup was going to come back to bite them. That maybe maybe he would have had another 2 weeks at the World Cup had they brought Jack Crowley on. We'll never know. And it's have to say, I've kind of wrestled with it ever since, because I wasn't really looking for it at the time, and then afterwards you look back and you go, God, maybe, but like, they did trust Crowley to come on in the pool game against South Africa, and he closed that one out. So should they have just trusted the kid to come on? You know, the kid is a bit strong, but he was 23, and do it. But yeah, I thought he kind of undermined his own argument there. I thought the line stuff was very, like, I was probably more drawn to the 2017 line store because I was there.
Have it here. I thought it was really so. I think this book's going to be really good. I'm doing the book launch with him at the Board Gosh, actually. So I've been reading more of it, and the childhood stuff is fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, I signed an NDA. I don't even know if I can say that much. I presume you can. You're allowed to say something's good.
It's positive, yeah.
But the New Zealand stuff and the extracts, it just tallies with the general tone of the book so far is very open and lots of interesting nuggets thrown in, you know? So, for instance, he says of 17, and he's fresh off 4 years previously winning the test in 2013 in Australia and having nothing but positive things to say about the Lions and Gatland. So week one, he thinks Gatland got the preparation all wrong. Sean O'Brien had said this at the time. Now, nobody had backed him up, but Sexton does here. And he said they trained way too hard. It was unlike Gatland. What I liked about him was that he had a good sense of what players needed. I liked the way he talked, like the buttons he pressed. I wouldn't rate him as highly as Joe Schmidt or Faz as a technical coach, but those two were amongst the best ever. As a manager selector, I thought Gats was quality. So he kind of couches it in nice terms, but thinks he messed up the first test. And then the third test, my biggest regret, we had some mandatory bonding, he puts in quotes, for a couple of days down in Queenstown. This was a bad idea. It reduced our chances of making history. The bonding idea took root just because the 09 Lions went on the piss for their final week in South Africa and then ended up winning the final test. Big deal. That series was already over. The Springboks picked their second string side for the last test. I was fine with having a few beers that night of the second test, recover Sunday, meetings Monday, train Tuesday, off Wednesday, light run Thursday and so on. Instead, we ended up training Wednesday, Thursday, Friday because we did virtually nothing except, in quotes again, bond at the start of the week. We were supposed to be preparing for a shot at history. It was crazy, unprofessional. And then he adds, I blame the senior players as well for not taking control of the situation, making sure we prepped properly. I include myself in that. We had enough experience in the group to speak up. I wish I'd said something. So I thought that was great. And then he touches on the omission from the 2021 COVID Lions test in 2021, again, Gatland there. And to the chippiness point, so Gregor Townsend is part of the staff, Scottish coach. When I saw the squad, it felt like Gats had been guided by someone else. 8 Scots in the squad? Based on what? 4th in the Six Nations? So he says, I never heard from Gats. He wasn't obliged to call me, of course. I didn't expect a call. Being picked for the Lions is an honour, privilege, not something you should ever think you're guaranteed. But I still get the occasional urge to call him and find out off the record exactly what was said in the selection meeting. You'd probably think I'd be... yeah, even just for the content.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, what a chapter that'd be.
Yeah, an extra chapter to back you.
And don't say off the record. Alan Shipnuck style. You'd probably think I'd be over it by now. It kills me to this day. His official line was that he didn't think I'd last the rigours of a series against the Springboks. I've heard a rumour that the Lions had been told I was too much of an insurance risk and that there was a danger that they'd be liable for an expensive payout if I got another head injury over there. He'd had a few concussions that year. Whatever. I didn't pay any attention to the rumours. I wasn't selected. End of story. And then he talks about Finn Russell getting injured in the tour, and he's at a cricket match at Lord's, and word comes through Marcus Smith is getting picked, and he says, 2 more beers, please, barman. And he concludes by saying, people say you're lucky, terrible tour, empty stadium, nonsense, is what he says. I'd have given anything to be there. So again, there's nothing there that's whoa, but it's just full of great stuff.
Johnny's he's so authentic. There's that word that, that's become very kind of, fashionable in the last couple of years. He's coming out, the book's coming out on the 10th of the 10th, I think, to get the kind of the number 10 zeitgeist, same day as Boris Johnson, I believe, which is also a number 10. And there's going to be a lot more truth, I'd imagine, in what Johnny's putting out there. And some of the stuff that he's put in there doesn't reflect terribly brilliant on himself, but he's being searingly honest, I think, about it. I was there in 17, and there was a lot of mandatory bonding going on with the journalists as well, because we had no press conferences to go to. They just disappeared. We all went to Queenstown with them, because that was part of the itinerary, and the All Blacks went to Auckland. The final game was in Eden Park.
I presume the All Blacks didn't go on the last...
No, they went and they prepared for a test match, and the Lions were blessed to draw that series. Roman Poit made an absolutely terrible blunder in the last few minutes of the game, and the All Blacks were there for the taking. The only thing I'd ask Johnny if I had a chance was what happened in 13, because I'm pretty sure in between tests 2 and 3 of a drawn series in 2013, they went to Noosa and went off tour. So this is Gatland's template for winning the Lions series, but they won that series. So does he have fonder memories of that than 17 because they went and won, or did they approach it differently? I remember being in Cowboys in Queenstown, which is basically the coppers of the operation, and
every town's got
3
to have
or
one.
4 of the English players wandered in at about 11 or 12 at night and saw us and then wandered back out again, but they were obviously looking for somewhere, and this was the Monday or the Tuesday of the game, which would be really unusual. I know there was a lot made of Peter O'Mahony and Conor Murray drinking rosé at the World Cup last year, but that was a good 10-11 days before the Scotland game. There is a balance in rugby. They do tend to go for a drink, but as Sexton says, the week of a test match, especially, if you win a Lions series in New Zealand, in material terms, you're basically invited back on every tour as an ambassador. The money that Johnny and that team would have made out of winning that series, and Johnny's, I don't think, motivated by that so much, but the prestige, the money, the ambassadorships that you get, it elevates you to another tier. And to go on the lash for a couple of days, they could have got to Queenstown and gone, right, we've drawn this, we've got a chance to do it here. Let's go, even go on the Sunday and then train on the Tuesday. It was mad stuff. I remember they put up Bobby Stridgen, the fitness coach, and Aina Falvey, the doctor, on a Tuesday because they needed to give us something because we'd all gone to Queenstown. I was just we can't ask you, what changes are you going to make for the weekend? What did you think of the match? It was a really strange scenario.
Is it not quite late in the tour for bonding?
What you prescribe for a hangover?
I think that was probably the most pertinent question. I remember Johnny and Owen Farrell, seeing them during the day. I think they were rooming together, and they really didn't partake. They might have gone for the dinner and gone home. I think you could tell. I think the idea was that, look, the work is done. You've been together for 5-6 weeks. You're all sick of each other, really. What we need to do now is, after 2 test matches, you've done all your conditioning, you've done all your fitness. Okay. Let's release the valve and get one last big hit out on the Saturday or Sunday. But even the Lions stay until the Tuesday, I think, after the last test. They have a bit of mandatory bonding after they finish as well. So it's if it they were so close to winning it, they almost blew it in the end. Would they have been better in that second half had they not been on the lash for a couple of days? Probably. But they drew a series in New Zealand despite this being hamstrung by this. I like the stuff about the first test is interesting as well. The overloading the training. That's probably more of a coaching failure in some ways. But it just prolongs Warren Gatland versus Ireland a little bit more, doesn't it? Even though he's
mandatory bonding is an interesting concept, isn't it?
Yes.
Have fun now. Go.
Yeah. Now, everybody, are you better friends than you were this time last night?
It's what we did about 50 minutes ago or so. It is strange.
Could be a name for the podcast.
Yeah, mandatory bonding.
Mandatory bonding.
It's better than what we have so far. There is a slight frustration as you read the book, and you get lots of just lovely little nuggets. Again, nothing that would cause career to be redefined in any great way. But it is horrible when you cover someone like Sexton for so long. You would feel this, I think, acutely, and you get so little, and then this huge information dump at the end, and just this, oh God. Why couldn't we have known all this at the time? And of course, you get it. They hold it for the book. They can't say a lot of this publicly until they can. But it just re-emphasizes that horrible sense that we're all getting 5% of the iceberg.
Johnny, like whenever Johnny did media,
Better than
which
most.
was infrequent until he became Ireland captain. I spoke to him a lot at the start of his career when he was an up-and-coming Leinster player, and he would do different sponsor gigs or different Leinster stuff, and I got him less and less as it went on. But then he became Ireland captain, and he was up every week, and I think he really relished that. And his press conferences were like you'd have to go to them because he was very good. He was very open, very honest, and was a great spokesman for his team. Thought about questions, wasn't a one game at a time merchant.
I'd excuse him, but I suppose it's just when you get the extra 80%.
Yeah. Well, I remember at the end of the 17 tour, I remember Sam Warburton being asked questions, and he was the captain, but he came into the mix zone after the third test, and someone asked him something. He said, you have to wait for the documentary. You're like, okay, our company's paid a couple of thousand for us to be here, but cheers. So yeah, like I suppose Johnny probably knew from a long way out that he was doing a book, and he didn't do a lot of, like, you would get him in press conferences, he did very few one-on-ones. Like, he wasn't someone to sit down for long form interviews. I'm really looking forward to Paul Kimmage just talking to him for Sunday Indo, and I think that'll be a nice little accompaniment to the book as well, because Paul will obviously have read the book and will go into his own style and his own directions, and it will challenge Johnny in certain ways as well. And like, he's left rugby completely. He has gone down a completely different path. There's every chance we might not hear that much from Johnny in this world again, because he's got a very good job and it's going well from what I believe. And I don't think there's any great desire for him to come back into it. So, Johnny may exit the stage. He doesn't want to do punditry, from what I understand. This all could change, obviously, but this may be, him drawing a line under it all and moving on to a different part of his life.
Yeah.
Just on a general note about that, when you're speaking to people and you're dying for them to be more honest than they are, I think it's definitely a case that when you speak to players that play in team sports, they just can't anymore.
They can't.
And you get better stuff from track and field athletes. You get better stuff from golfers because they're only speaking for themselves, so they're more inclined to say what they feel. Whereas, it's such a buy-in now at an elite level that you have to adhere to nobody's going rogue, nobody's going to say anything whatsoever that could be conceived as having a detrimental effect on the team or drawing too much attention to it or whatever else.
And whatever about an experienced player, if you're a young to youngish player, can you imagine the fear?
Oh, petrified.
Imagine.
Then along comes someone like Mark Hansen who doesn't give a damn and just is completely like just his own man, and you just love it if rubbed off on a few other people, because it actually doesn't affect the team. It doesn't affect his performance.
It's interesting you say that, because actually he was interviewed in Life magazine yesterday by Pat McCarry, and the line he said to Pat, I'm sure I didn't read the piece yet, but I just saw the quote. Pat had obviously asked him about that openness, and Mark Hansen's line on it was, unless you guys pretty soon stop blowing up everything we say, then we just can't say anything.
Yeah, well, there is that too, but it's a chicken and egg situation too. Because people say so little, you have to make more of the little they say.
I've seen your eyes light up. Know what you're about. So just before we sign off for today, we're not actually doing an in-depth rugby chat at any stage this week. However, Donncha O'Callaghan amongst those not impressed with Munster's showing in Parma.
It was totally unacceptable from Munster. Their performance there as individuals, as a team, to go on the road. Like, we know what Zebra are. They were bottom of the league last year, but Munster look back on that and they should be embarrassed with that performance.
We had never heard of COVID the last time Zebra scored 40 points in this competition.
Yeah.
So what is this all-time shocking level of performance? What happened here?
Let's say we started with Gary Neville, disgusting. We finished with Donncha O'Callaghan with embarrassing. It's a shocking result. Zebra played very well, but Munster, it's all the stuff that Gary Neville said about. We talked about United. It was application.
They were ahead 28-15 at half time.
Yes, and hadn't played pretty well in that. I didn't think they were great. I was down at the Munster Connacht game. I'm doing their game against Ospreys this weekend. I didn't think they were great against Connacht. I thought Connacht were the far more impressive team, but contrived to lose the game. They picked. It wasn't the strongest team. They're still waiting on internationals to come back. They picked up 2 backline injuries. These are all excuses. Really, you would expect Munster to go and not concede. Was it 6 tries against Zebra?
Because defensively against Connacht, the tries they conceded, several of them were really poor as well.
Yeah, but defending's been a bit of an issue for all 4 provinces so far this season. It's a bit of a common trend. And Leinster would have been bitten by a better team on Friday, but the Dragons didn't have the teeth to kind of punish them when they got through. But Munster just looked like they had a poor pre-season in terms of the 2 games they played in pre-season. They lost them both. They played really badly. There was a softness to them. Then they pitched up against Connacht and conceded 5 tries but won the game, and kind of sailed. You kind of thought, yeah, that's a good, perfect, because they got a kick, but they also got the full complement of points, and they got Zebre to build on this week. Like Zebre, Italian rugby has been improving. The under 20, like Zebre are a development team. The Italian under 20s team have been very good in recent years. They have better players than they used to have, but Munster. And maybe this was the issue they had, where they went over saying, well, we're Munster, they're Zebre, we just need to turn up and win. They played a little bit like that, and it came back to bite them in the backside, and they were really loose, really poor, and they have now got themselves back in a position where they're being called an embarrassment live on national television after 2 games of the URC season. And they now have they should beat the Ospreys, although the Ospreys are decent next Saturday in Cork. But the following week they've got Leinster in Croke Park, 65,000 tickets already sold. All the internationals back for both teams. Like Munster do look like they could do it. Jack Crowley, Peter O'Mahony, would definitely. Tyke Byrne, the club captain, will elevate the standard when they come back. But Leinster have a lot more to come back, and it doesn't take long for Munster to end up in crisis territory. We know this over the years. They are one of the most talked about teams in Irish sport. So when they lose to Zebre on a run-of-the-mill Saturday when no one's watching, it was a fairly. If they won that one by 2 points, we wouldn't be talking about it. Suddenly, it's turned into a big story, for good reason. It's well below what we expect of them. They are the champions from 2 years ago, and it just puts them in a bit of a hole early on, and that's what they didn't need, because this is year 3 under Roundtree. They want to be consistent. They seem to just be they just vacillate from good to bad so quickly, and like what's happened in the last 2 years is they've had these moments and they've ended up in contention at the end of the year. So we shouldn't panic on them, but really, if they want to be taken seriously as a club, as a team, they need to cut this stuff out and be consistent across the season. Everyone's entitled to a bad day, but you should be good enough to beat Zebre on your bad days.
Connacht were 20 points down at half-time at the Dexcom Stadium. There's a sinister sound to that, isn't there? The Dexcom.
Especially when there's not, like, when the TV cameras, I'm sure for good reasons, are on the side up where there is a crowd, so you're just looking at a building site, because they've levelled the Clan Terrace, so it looks a bit weird. So
they came back. They roared back to win 36-30 at the Dexcom.
Yeah.
Leinster at the Aviva final, thought on the rugby against the Dragons. 19,000 there at the Aviva. You were there. It was interesting. Your match report said only Leinster can win 6-0 and come away with question marks, which is the nature of their plight. What was it like, 19,000 at the Aviva?
Wasn't bad when we first walked in and the upper tier is closed and the press boxes in the upper tier. It just did feel like you were thrown back into COVID when we were at games in the empty stadium. But the lower bowl did fill up and they made good noise. And yeah, like, it's not the biggest occasion that's going to be there this season. And the Dragons at home is not a great game to kick off your Aviva stint. But
19,000 is not bad, actually.
19,000 is a great crowd,
isn't it,
for Dragons at home?
For a non-entity of a Friday night.
Yeah, like a game that everyone knows they're going to win, with a team that's minus most of the internationals. It was, like, they did a good job of it. They put on Leinster put on a bit of a show. It's a little bit razzmatazz for my liking. It's a bit organised fun, but like, it gets the crowd on their feet and they got involved with it. These games are a bit strange because everyone knows what's going to happen, but Leinster have a lot of flaws at the moment, and the Dragons were able to expose the flaws without punishing them. Their defence was poor. They dropped a lot of ball. Ross Byrne missed 4 kicks out of 6. They need to step it up in the next 2 weeks before the Munster game as well, but they've got 10 points out of 10, so they're in a strong position, and they have the personnel to do it. Like, Caelan Doris, one of many players, will come back into the team in the next 2 weeks. So I think they'll be fine in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll get into Europe and La Rochelle away, and we'll slowly build towards the time of the year, every year, where we judge Leinster in 2 or 3 games.
Well, much like Rory McIlroy, we could pause this conversation for several months. I think we found the name of our panel, perhaps. Organised Fun.
Perfect.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
Time for Organised Fun. That might be it. Anyone wants to beat it, they can email in.
Stayed here long enough.
So we got to go. Rory O'Connor, Conor McKeown. Rory O'Connor, Conor McKeown. Yes, sorry. They don't roll into each other very nicely.
I know we're new colleagues, so it's fine.
Rory O'Connor, Conor McKeown. Thank you for the Organised Fun.
Thank you.